people who were not nobles, who were not in the high church. It was an unjust situation, as that cartoon points out. And in 1789, that person who was being so oppressed stood up and threw off the yoke of oppression. Up at the top there, you have the man holding the head of the king. He was beheaded, he was guillotined. Picture at the bottom on your left is a picture of the Third Estate, the people who were being persecuted, rising up now to destroy the system. And so what we have written there then is the motto of the revolution. Unity, indivisibility of the Republic, and then those three words, liberty, equality, fraternity, or death. So if you didn't accept those things, your head came off. And it's in that setup then that Eugene de Mazenod was born. In that house in Aix-en-Provence, a house that doesn't look all that exciting from these pictures, but it is a house in which 4 members of the family lived. His father, his mother, he, and his sister. And if you look at the top of the house, you can see the little windows. 12 servants lived and worked in that house to look after 4 people. So that says something about which side of the dividing line Eugene was on. His father was president, he was a lawyer, a judge, a president of the Court of Finances. His mother was a very rich woman. And there we have the first ever painting of Eugene de Mazenod. He's a boy, even though he's got long hair. 5 years old. You look at him, you can see a little kid who was born having everything that he wanted. He had all the material things, he had all the love of his family. But he belonged to that group of people who lost their heads because they were nobles. And so when the revolution came to Aix-en-Provence, this family had to flee. And Eugene spent the next 11 years of his life running away in Italy. When he was 20 years old, he came back to France. Napoleon had now taken over, he came back. And he got right back into the whole nobility story. If you look at that picture, that's a drawing of him that he sat for as a portrait when he was 23 years old. And he was furious that the painter had given him a double chin. 23-year-old guys are not supposed to have double chins. Look at the way he's dressed, look at his sideburns, look at his hair, look at the clothing. He got right back into the social life. And he was out every night. Out at parties, at dances, at dinners. And having a whale of a time. He writes to his father, who had remained in Sicily, "You can die of pleasure here in Aix-en-Provence." Not of boredom, of pleasure. And so this very self-centered young man was only thinking of his pleasure, of his money. He was looking for a girl who would bring a big fat dowry to the marriage. This guy, thinking only of himself, eventually has God who begins to shake him by the head. And he goes into a period of crisis. And he writes to his father, "I have been out every single night. Now for 3 weeks I have not walked out of the house." And everything was getting boring. Everything had lost meaning. And it was God working on this young man. And one Good Friday, it all came together. It was at the church ceremony, and we have this thing where you unveil the cross, you open up the cross and show it on Good Friday. As he looked at that cross, he had an illumination, an idea that changed his life. He realized God's love for him. He realized that those arms open on the cross were open for him. And all of a sudden, the moment he experiences this hug of God, as being loved by God, he began to become aware that there were other people. Before that, he thought only of himself and his pleasure. Now he says, God came to the cross, Jesus died on the cross to prove his love for me, but I'm not the only one standing at the foot of the cross. There were millions of people standing at the foot of that cross. And as he began to look at them, because he now became aware of others, said, but many of them do not know about God's love. Many of them have no one to tell them, God opened his arms on the cross for you. You are loved. Here is meaning in your life. And so that is how his vocation was born. So powerful was this change, this liberation that had happened in him, that he then understood that he wanted to spend the rest of his life leading others to his same experience. And it was an experience of finding light and meaning in darkness. And so that's where it was all born, in that experience. Having said that, I've summed up the rest of Eugene de Massillon's life. He spent the rest of his life leading others to his same experience of having been free, of having found light, of having found meaning in his life. And he did it through becoming a priest. He went to the seminary, came back to Aix-en-Provence, and said, I don't want to go into a parish. We've got lovely parishes, we've got lots of priests looking after people, but I want to look for the people who are not being touched by the church's structures. And so as he was walking around the streets, he would meet early in the morning the people who were the workers, the humble people, the workers, the domestic servants, the laborers, and he heard them speaking Provençal and not French. And he realized these people don't have anyone to preach to them in their language. They don't know about the love of God because no one is telling them about it. And so he began his work of preaching to people in their local language, in the Provençal language. And he started off in Lent 1813 by inviting people to come at 6 o'clock in the morning to a sermon in Provençal. And he did it in a huge church, the Church of the Madeleine, and he packed that church. That's how thirsty and hungry people were for something in their own vocabulary, in their own language. And that then started him off on a ministry of looking out for people that the church was not getting to, that the church was not touching. And he had one message and one message only. Lead them to his same experience of having found light and meaning in his life. Every morning as he walked to the church, he would walk in front of the prison. And he became aware that the prisoners in there were abandoned. The church was not touching them. There was no church presence to those that poor category of people. And he began then to work with the prisoners. Again, in the Provençal language, again in concepts that meant something to them. He would say to them, you are the rejects of society, says the society, but God died for you. You have a dignity. Let me help you to change your life. So with the prisoners, it was leading them to find light and meaning. With the youth, the Napoleonic spirit was, don't teach these guys too much about God. Don't teach them catechism. What do I want? I want obedient soldiers for my empire. That was Napoleon. And Eugene said, I have to do something for these young people. They are abandoned. And he began a work with them where he used to have 300 young people who used to gather for the whole day, twice a week. And it's interesting to look at what he was doing with them all the time, to lead them to his same experience, to show them as young adolescents, as young students, as young professionals, this is the way to have light and